Welcome back to another episode of Hodinkee Radio. My guest this week is Sylvain Berneron. Sylvain is a designer and the founder of one of the most exciting young brands. Before starting Berneron, Sylvain spent 5 years at Breitling, where he eventually became chief product officer. There, he helped completely revamp and build a product portfolio after the brand's acquisition. Before Breitling, he was also a watch designer at Richemont, working on projects for its portfolio of brands. He got his start designing motorcycles and cars, most notably for brands like BMW and Ducati. Now Berneron is leading his own brand, and his first watch, the Mirage, makes a statement. It's an asymmetrical gold wristwatch that takes its shape from its custom caliber. More important than his background, though, Sylvain is one of the most thoughtful guys around. We talk about his career, what watch design is missing, and about building his own brand and developing the Mirage. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and thanks for listening. Sylvain Berneron, founder of the hottest watch brand, I think I could be so bold as to say. Welcome to Hodinkee Radio. How you doing today?
Yeah, good. Thank you very much, Tony. That's a spicy introduction. So thank you very much for having me.
Sure. Where are you calling from?
I'm actually in Neuchâtel right now, where our HQ is based, so in the heart of the watchmaking region. So, I mean, as we speak, this is still my flat. So we have ground level where Marie-Alix and I live, and I sort of, conquered the roof below the floor below the roof, where we do most of the operations. So I have boxes and components and all of that, and we're going to take dedicated offices early next year.
So before we get into your background, I want to ask you, I think the foundation for you starting your own brand, Berneron, and then your first watch, the Mirage, comes from obviously your experience designing cars, motorcycles, and then watches for the past 5 or 10 years, however long it's been. But obviously starting your own brand comes from a place of passion, but I also imagine in some level it has to come from a place of frustration, perhaps, of where existing watch brands and watch design is. So I want to ask you what the most frustrating thing is about modern watch design from current or larger brands is to a designer like you.
Well, it always depends what kind of target you're pursuing, I guess. So I had the chance to work for the group Richemont and then to work for Breitling. These are large public brands which produce hundreds of thousands of watches. Their goal is not to venture into sketchy, risky, creative endeavors. The goal is to produce in large scale a very reliable product, which turned out into a status symbol. So, and in that respect, I think they fulfill the goal and the client's wishes very well. In my case, my mother was a painter. She gave me a strong artistic education. And I always felt the need to venture into more risky stuff. So I had the same frustration in the car industry, even more, I would say, because cars are heavily restricted for pollution, aerodynamics, safety features, all these things, which is why I moved to the watchmaking industry, which for me and for any designer is a fantastic playground because watches are no longer tools. Since 50 years, pretty much since the quartz crisis, you no longer need a watch, especially not a mechanical watch, to have precise timekeeping. Which opens different fields of playfulness for the discipline, and that begs the question of what is a well-designed watch, because I've been taught at school that good design is form following function. After 15 years as a designer, I tend to agree with that definition. But the question for a mechanical watch is what is its function? Because if what you want from a watch is good timekeeping, you will be good to go with a baseline swatch at $50 with the quartz movement. You'll have precise timekeeping. But most of us watch collectors tend to spend multiples of that amount on mechanical watches. And then all of a sudden the function becomes, it could be different things. You could be expecting status symbol, you could want some technical superlative, you could want some métier d'art, you could want some artistic endeavor. It depends. In my case, at Berneron, I want to talk to educated collectors that have a deep understanding of art and technique, and not necessarily to guys who just want to show off, which is why my watches are thin. I make them in white gold, which is probably the most understated metal, because as a collector myself, this is what speaks to me. Art and technique, something that you can enjoy without looking too fancy and too offensive to others. So this is what I try to bring in the product.
You kind of asked yourself the question that I wanted to ask you next, which is basically what is a good design? Because it's something we talk about a lot. We even hear about a lot on Hodinkee when we're introducing new watches or covering new watches. This design succeeds or fails because of this or that reason. And I wanted to ask you to just dig into this idea of what makes a good design, specifically a good watch design, a little bit more. You mentioned form follows function, obviously one of our favorite cliches to repeat in the watch industry, but certainly you've thought about other sort of key principles that drive your watch design. So I wanted you to just kind of talk about it a little bit more, other principles or features of a watch that you really look for when you're designing or analyzing someone else's design, perhaps.
A good design is something, in my opinion, that needs to be justified. As a designer, you're not here to please yourself, and the reflection of saying, "Oh, I did this because I like it," is far from being enough. This is not. We are not here to. It's not a hobby. It's we've been trained multiple years. I've studied 5 years, and so, for example, when you make a motorcycle, you will find three types of surfaces. You will have ergonomic surfaces, the ones that you sit on or you grip. You will have the aerodynamic surfaces, important for the efficiency of the bike, and you have technical surfaces, which are pretty much what keeps the bike together as one object. And once you've learned these three things, you can actually design an object and make sure its surface you design meets one of these criteria. On a watch, it's actually much easier because the technique is usually within a cylinder, within the movement space required. So the technique is pretty basic. The ergonomic is quite simple as well because you have to wrap around the wrist. So the definition of the surfaces involved are pretty simple, which is why basically you could sum up a watch if you were to do a very functional driven design process. You could end up with a watch that costs $20, a round quartz movement, a straight band around your wrist, and that would be it. That would be the I would say the very theoretical approach to designing a watch. And the watchmaking industry is very special because it's actually one of the few objects that changed its status during the course of its history. It started as a pure tool. We needed watches in cities, on churches, then in pockets, then on the wrist to keep time, and that was important for agriculture, for different types of businesses to not miss a train, a boat, or whatever. So it was a real tool. And now, since 50 years, we all have iPhones that will change the time when you land in a different country on its own. So we don't need these things as tools, and they clearly became a piece of jewelry, which, in my opinion, has to be deeply connected to the culture of the society we live in.
We're going to get to you and the founding of Berneron and the Mirage and how you answered some of these questions about what a watch should be nowadays. But before that, we got to get to know you a little bit better, Sylvain, of course. So you mentioned at the top there that your mother was a painter and how much that's influenced your chosen career path and how you view the world, even. But I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about sort of your upbringing and then how it's impacted the way you view sort of design and specifically now, obviously, watch design.
Yes, so I grew up around Paris, in Versailles, to be precise, very close to Paris. My mother was a painter, although she never made a living from it. It was basically at the time where pursuing a proper artistic career was not very well accepted, where she came from. And my dad is an engineer in the tech industry, so he used to make cell phones and internet Wi-Fi boxes and stuff like this. So he really lived the boom in the early 80s of how do you call it? It's this tech industry sort of. So my dad is very well planted into the ground, very rational, strong mathematician, He's some sort of a petrol head as well, because he gave me the love for riding motorcycles. And my mother was a lot more poetic, a lot more willing to take risk. She was actually painting directly on the walls, not on a canvas. So I grew up in a house where I had 15 different living rooms over the course of my childhood, because she would repaint endlessly on it. And he was like a ever moving painting, if you like, in the living room. And I always loved this. So I spent multiple rainy weekends drawing and painting with her. And when it was the spring and the summer, I used to ride motorcycles with my dad. That's pretty much. And right now, I feel it's funny how our parents influence us very much. I'm pretty much right in the middle between the two. So I love technique very much, because my dad taught me how to maintain my bike, so I know how to dismount and remount a motorcycle engine, for example, and to take care of a motorcycle. So that knowledge translated into the good understandings that I have now about watchmaking and how pinions work and the different springs and jewels and axes. And my mother gave me the artistic fire, I would say, which sometimes I don't know if it's a curse or a blessing. It depends because and that translates to why I had to leave Breitling to make my own company, because I had to do it. It's very hard to explain to a lot of my friends. They keep asking me, "Look, you were set. You were 35, 34 years old, board member at Breitling. Why the hell did you have to make it more complicated?"
You started developing the Mirage in what, 2020, 2021?
2021, yes.
And it's hard to remember now, but because dress watches and shaped watches are a little bit more popular nowadays. But in those days, I mean, it was still sports watch everything, right? It was integrated
Mhm.
bracelets and all these types of things. And now it seems very in vogue. But when you started developing it, you could have had no idea that that's where the trend was going, right?
Yes, yes, and I didn't. It was a very selfish move. So first, so I joined Breitling in 2000 mid 18. I spent more than 5 years at Breitling, and I developed an entire product department, from marketing, strategy, design, product development, movement development, and prototyping. So when I left 6 months ago, I was responsible for a team of 50 people across all these different fields. I learned a great deal. I mean, I've been working for George Kern for 10 years, effectively, because we worked at Richemont before. It was a tremendous learning curve for me. But at night, I was dreaming about making something different for me, and I never poured my own taste into the work at Breitling, because I never forgot that when you work for a big brand, the designer should not try to please himself. You're here to serve the brand. You should understand the brand you work with, and it's not about pleasing Sylvain Berneron. It's about writing a new page in the Breitling legacy and making sure that the work you put in the market is actually coherent with the brand philosophy and its values. So I was 2 years into my job at Breitling, and I started to discuss with George. I was like, look, I'd like to try a little something on my own. I want to make a small batch of maybe 100 pieces or something. It won't have anything to do with the Breitling aesthetics or even the Breitling universe. I just want to do a little project just to please myself, and to make sure that I can keep my rational approach when I do Breitling projects. But I need a little bubble of air to go crazy on the side. That took a good 6 months to negotiate. And George agreed back then to reduce my contract from 100 to 80%. That lasted for 2 years. And this is when I started developing the Mirage on Fridays and Saturday, Sunday, of course. So I've been working 7 days a week for the past 3 years, and I've invested 15 years of my own savings. My dad was not very pleased about that, because I was supposed to buy a house as a good man. At the last minute, and 4 years into my marriage, I asked my Alex if she was fine for me to spend my cash, so I didn't spend her money, but to spend my money into this watch project, and it's pretty much all of it. Return on investment not guaranteed at all. I could have lost it all, but I really had to do this. And she knew. She actually told me, "I know you'll be happier with a failing watch brand rather than a good house, and if you don't try." So she agreed to let me try, and I'm sure you relate to this, right? Because I mean, you had a very good lawyer career going on, if I'm not mistaken, and you took the energy, and I know what it takes. You know, the evenings, the weekends to get something done on your own, and you made the same leap of faith that I did, which is to follow your guts and go into what speaks to you, and just like in my situation, I'm not sure if it makes financial sense, but at least you know why you wake up every morning, and that has a lot of value in my eyes.
Well, I'm pretty sure I was a mediocre attorney, and I'm pretty sure you're a super talented designer. But putting that beside the point, I wanted to circle back a little bit to before your time at Breitling, because you kind of mentioned there the genesis of the Mirage and the idea of doing something for yourself. But at that point, you had been working for a number of big brands for probably a decade or something. So if you could just talk about sort of your career up to Breitling. I know you started designing cars and motorcycles, and then how you got involved with Richemont and George Kern, and then how that led to your time at Breitling.
Okay, so basically, from 5 years old to 15 years old, I was drawing with my mom as a hobby during the rainy weekends. As I grew up, school became more and more painful. When I was 15 years old, I could not sit on a chair for 2 hours. I was not bad at school, but I just could not take it. So this is when this was actually a pivotal turning moment in my life when I went to middle school. So in France, you are 14 years old, so to speak. You have to choose a major. And my dad came to me and asked, "Okay, well, you know, what major would you like to do next year?" For him, it was clear I was supposed to do an engineering or mathematical major because that's the most noble studied path you're supposed to go for. And when he asked me, "What do you want to do for your studies?" I said, "I want to do fine arts." And I will remember his answer my whole life. He said, "No, no, no, Sylvain. I don't ask you what you want to do as a hobby. I ask you what you want to study." And he didn't mean to hurt me at all. He was very serious because for my dad, drawing cannot be a job. And he never meant it in a bad way or anything. But so we had quite a bit of argument this day because I think he was worried and he wanted me to study something serious. Thanks to my mom, she defended and she basically convinced him to let me study fine arts. So I started to study fine arts as a major in my program at the age of 15 years old. So you had very few schools that would offer this program. So I had, as of 15 years old, to take, I think it was two buses, and I had like 2 hours of commuting a day very early on, just because I had to go to the other side of the city to attend to this program. This is actually when all my discipline problems disappeared because I was all of a sudden very into this study. So I got my A level in fine arts. And then I decided to push further and to study industrial design at university. In France, you would not find any major. Basically, you study transportation design as a whole, and you can do boats, planes, trains, cars, any sort of highly technical object. You would follow the same courses. So I studied 3 years in that university, and I won a design contest. And back then, they would not give you money; they would give you an internship in a prestigious company. So the first prize was a 6 months internship in Munich at BMW. Of course, I took that. I was very happy. So I packed my little suitcase. I was 18 years old and I went to BMW. Did my 6 months. I had great fun. I learned a ton and they took me out of school. So I went from being an intern to an apprentice, and I was going to night courses in the University of Munich. And this is how I completed my master's degree in industrial design. And after 5 years, I realized that although I loved my job, that Germany was not for me. I never really coped with the culture, the food, the language. So I decided to go back to Paris, where I came from, and I opened a little design studio on my own, where I retained BMW as a client. I also freelanced for Porsche, for Ducati, for MV Agusta. So I started to travel in Italy, in different countries to attend to these meetings, although I was 23 still. So I made a few concept vehicles for these different brands. And it is during this period that I had the first freelance missions for Richemont through IWC. Uh, so I decided to, after a few projects that I enjoyed doing as a freelancer, I decided to join Richemont in Mérin, close to Genève, in the campus de la Haute Horlogerie, where you have all the Richemont brands packed together. Worked 5 years for Richemont through IWC, Baume Mercier, for George. George has always been the boss of my boss, sort of, always working for him. And when he moved to Breitling to become the CEO, we've discussed, and he gave me the chance to basically take over the entire product slash design department for Breitling, which was a very interesting mission because Breitling didn't have these resources internally yet. They were still having their cases and their designs made by external companies back then.
I mean, it's kind of commercially and sort of product enthusiast wise, the growth of Breitling over the past 5 years or since 2018, however long that's been, has been really lauded, I think, and applauded by the market and by enthusiasts. So, can you just unpack sort of how you built up that product department from scratch almost? I mean, what it took to do that?
Yes. So when I arrived, we were four people. So I had a team of three people. George's mission and goal was very clear. He wanted to revamp the entire product portfolio from A to Z. When George took over the brand, Breitling was making 400 million of turnover. When I left, and the brand is still growing, they are currently making almost a billion. It's not a secret.
Yep.
So slowly but surely, we integrated product design, technical construction, marketing, strategy, movement development, casing development, and you basically step by step grow the team, acquire more and more competencies. So when I left 6 months ago, we had a fully integrated product department of 60 people across different fields, as I described before, basically from strategy up to prototyping. So we have the entire product spectrum and all the tools required to basically create a watch from start to finish. Um, so you had two dimensions. I learned how to manage a team. I learned how to take care of people, to play also a little bit with the politics involved in big companies. And we all know you have politics in big brands, but for example, designers are not. We don't get trained to play with these things. So you have to. And as it turned out, I'm not a very good tactician when it comes to politics. I tend to say what I mean, and to. So I had some rough meetings, let's say, but at least I always had good intentions. So I think this is how I survived pretty much.
Maybe this is a question that builds on your point of politics there, but I'm wondering if you could just take us inside one of those rough meetings, perhaps. What's something that you argue about as a designer? Because I think we only see the end product, right? And we don't, we,
Mhm.
the consumer, I'm speaking of here, or the enthusiast, we see the end product. We don't see that everything that went into it, the 2 or the 5 years, all of the development that went into it. And we say, man, I wish it were 2 millimeters thinner, or 5 millimeters smaller in diameter, or why didn't they do this or that, or whatever it is. So I'm wondering if you could, maybe this is taking us into one of those contentious meetings that you might have had as a designer, but explain that process a little bit more.
So the Breitling Design Studio, when I was there, was an absolute bunker. And it's not to because we think we are better than others. It's because when you hire, I had designers that were very good at what they do, but if you put them in endless meetings with a lot of pressure, you actually erase any potential of dreaming, of being sensible, of having some sort of poetry into your work. And designers, this is what they need. So I actually took a lot of pressure on myself. So I had endless, very complicated meetings. When you spend 4 hours in a meeting room, not necessarily screaming, but basically fighting and arguing, and these are meetings that wear on you. And when you go back into the studio, you put your politic smile and you say, "Look, guys, it's all fine. We're gonna make it through." Although I was completely smashed inside. But and another anecdote directly on the product. These big companies, like every company, have financial targets to meet, which means every product is heavily dissected, and you basically have one budget for the case, one budget for the dial, one budget for each component of the watch that you have to keep track of in order to make sure your watch meets the right coefficient of profitability for the brand. This is not only at Breitling, you have the same at Richemont and in every decent business that basically wants to make sure they will hit their turnover objectives at the end of the year. Uh, Again, so Lars, if you hear me, I apologize in advance, but I had another conflictual discussion. Uh, Basically, the finance guys looked into the product split, the cost, and they thought that they could come to the product team, not only design, but product development and the supply chain, the people who buy the components. They said, "Oh, we think we could squeeze the price of a dial from, basically -10% or 15%." So I waited. I sat there very quietly to hear their expose. And Lars goes like, "Look, Sylvain, what do you think? Because I mean, at the end of the day, you have to agree with this." And I told him, "Look, Lars, I can take the dial off if you want, if that bothers you. No, if this is really what we talk about, to save three francs on a fucking dial, I can take it off. And you'll explain to the clients why we don't put a dial, because we have, mental profitability." Uh, and to me, this is really where the line should not be crossed. It's fine to be more profitable. It's fine to be more efficient and stuff. Let's not forget that we ask people to come in our stores to spend a fortune on something that you don't need. So the bare minimum we should do is to make sure that the money is well spent, and that when the client take his credit card to pay, he can feel the sweat that we put into it. So, and in every meeting, this is always how I took decisions. I always try to put myself in the shoes of the end customer. And this is where people realize all of a sudden, because I mean, we all work in big companies, and then when you are in your job during the week, you tend to forget that you do this for others. And I try to never forget. I think as a designer, the first goal is to, I don't pretend to make people's life better making mechanical watches, but at least if I can make people smile and be a little happier and have positive emotions, I think it's a good contribution as a human being to the current society. So this is what I try to work towards.
Well, we've kind of already talked about or hinted at the launch of Berneron in your own brand and the first watch, the Mirage, but maybe you can really dig into it here and just tell us. Basically, I saw a working prototype at Watches and Wonders a couple of months ago. A year before that, I saw a prototype with a paper movement inside, and I knew
Yeah.
you were developing it for at least a couple of years before that, as we've been talking about. But maybe if you can just run us through that entire timeline a little bit to give us a little bit of a peek inside what it's like to launch your own brand with your own name on it from scratch.
Okay, so you have to see this project, and I think like any starter project, like a tree. So you have the part that you see, which are the leaves, basically. So that's the creative output. That's the Mirage collection, and the roots is basically the architecture you need behind the legal structure, the investment, the money, to basically build a company around it. So as a startup, I have to do the two in parallel. So the leaves, the project of the Mirage, this is the reason why I built an entire company around it. After 10 years in the watchmaking business, I came to realize that the two fields I love the most, because I'm a collector myself, are classic round pieces with good watchmaking substance. One example could be Lange 1815, Patek 96. And on the other side, shaped pieces like Cartier Crash, Gilbert shaped case, Reverso. And these two fields in watchmaking never seem to meet. So either you have to choose a shaped case and you have a very poor watchmaking substance, or you choose a good movement and you will have a pretty common, if not dare I say it, boring design. And I wanted to bridge the two because I love technique, I love good movements, I love good finishing that really moves me, and I also love shaped cases. So I started to draw from a blank piece of paper a train of gears. I wanted a large 3 days power reserve with a large flying barrel. I wanted a large balance wheel with a stable chronometry, and I wanted a direct small second at 6 o'clock like a pocket watch. I drew this entire set of gears myself. Um, and then when I realized that this movement would be huge, I decided to go around the gears. Basically, if the movement I made in a round ébauche, in a round base plate, would have made a 44, 45 millimeter watch, especially because the barrel is very large. Uh, so this is when the idea and my, I would say, my love for shaped cases, I was like, okay, what if I try to do a shaped movement? And so I drew basically around the gears to keep the movement as compact as possible. And this is when I ended up with this heavily asymmetric movement, and I decided to draw the case around it. So to synthesize it, the Mirage, despite being another shaped case, is actually very different in its DNA because it took its asymmetry from the inside, from the technique, to go onto the case. And to me, this is, and that refers to what we talked earlier in this discussion, to good design is form following functions. So as a designer, I decided to let the mechanics go free, the barrel, the escape wheel, the train of gears, basically took the space it needed on the base plate, and then I coped with it creatively and I decided to draw around it. So this is the whole idea of the Mirage, of a shaped watch that finds its asymmetry from the inside.
That's kind of only the start of the movement development, right? The shape of
Mhm.
it all and then how that impacts the cases you're talking about. Because once you decided this was a project that you wanted to pursue, you apparently you said to yourself, I'm not going to compromise at all. And that meant, I mean, I want you to describe to us what this
Yeah.
meant, but as far as movement development, it's all gold everything is kind of the headline, but just talk about like what that meant to you.
Yes, my goal was to, and that's my mother's spirit probably speaking out through me. It's really an act of love and devotion. Any artistic endeavor, by definition, is transforming a constraint into an opportunity. Whether you do painting, dancing, singing, it doesn't matter. It becomes a truly artistic project when, again, you turn a challenge into an opportunity. But in my case, I wanted to come up with what is to me the ultimate expression of a dress watch. And this has to have three things: thin on the wrist, sitting very low on the wrist, precious metal, time only. And I decided basically to tick all the three boxes and to go very far in them. So thinness, the movement is 2.3 millimeter. The overall watch, the metal band is 4.9 millimeters. So that's quite thin. It's not world record breaking, but I don't have this claim either. Time only, of course. So I took a small second at 6 o'clock, a sector dial, which are attributes that are deeply rooted into traditional watchmaking. It comes from the early pocket watches from the 19th century. And the third precious metal, again, I decided to go all in. So it's not only a gold case. The Mirage is actually what we call a full gold construction. So the base plate, the bridges, the dial, the hands, the case, the buckle, and actually even the spring bars. All these components are in 18 karat white or yellow gold, as it matters.
You mentioned thinness. Can you talk about flipping the hands?
Yes, in the process of making a watch as thin as possible, you quickly end up fighting against physics. So when you want to go under 2 millimeters as a movement, and I was actually with at Concepto this morning. They are the company who make the world record breaking movement for Bulgari. And we had this discussion this morning. He confirmed, Valérien, that once you go under 2 millimeter for watch movement, you venture into troubles. So this is where you need to use fancy materials. You have to give up on finishing. You have to give up on performance, reliability. So I didn't want to cross that line, especially as a startup. You don't want to end up selling watches that keep breaking. So which is why I imposed on myself to stay at 2.3 millimeter, which is already quite demanding, especially in full gold. So I was stuck, or let's say I locked myself on 2.3 for the movement. So I was like, okay, what else can I do to improve the slenderness of the case? And this is where the idea of reversing the end stack came. So on a normal watch, you have the minute hand sitting on top of the minute, and the minute hand is the longest, which means in a section, you have to wait until your minute hand finishes before you can drop the glass onto the case. In the Mirage, I reversed the end stack. So you have the hour hand on top, and that allows me to drop the profile of the glass much sooner onto the case profile, which brings a benefit of saving height by around 15% on a case band.
Why does a brand like Breitling or any other big brand, any other brand really, why do they put the minute hand on top?
Because usually you have a center second as well, which I don't have because I have a direct small second. And basically, the physics say that the faster your hands turn, the smaller you want your pivot to be to reduce friction. What I mean, so the logic says that the hour hand is the slowest turning, so you have the biggest cannon, if you want, because it turns very slow, and the faster you go, you reduce the diameter. In my case, between a minute and an hour, it doesn't matter very much, so I was able to flip them around. But if I had a center second, for example, it would not be recommended to have strong friction of a second turning on a big axis because you drain a lot of power from the movement.
You mentioned a little bit the resistance you encountered, the commitment that you made, financially and time, and all of that type of stuff. But I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about, I think you've even told some people sort of how much you've committed and invested in this project personally.
Personally, I've invested 1.1 million of my own savings into this project. I don't come from a family where that money has been given to me. It took me 15 years to save that money. During 15 years, I also had to reduce on, buying toys, fancy holidays, whatever. I actually had to give up on the idea of buying a house to spend that money into this project. For the record, I had to sell 90% of my private watch collection as well. I had 25 pieces. I'm down to 4 pieces. I drive a car that is, very cheap, very crappy. For the record, my colleagues at Breitling asked me to park very far at the end of the parking lot because I was quote unquote damaging the public
Oh,
picture of the
come
company.
on.
No, no, I swear. But I mean, this is where, and people ask me quite a bit when I was working at Breitling, were like, come on, Sylvain, you're a board member at Breitling and you drive a $1,000 car. Really? I was like, yeah, well, you know. So all that is to say that the commitment involved, it's not only a creative risk. I'm literally playing with personal bankruptcy because you invest all the money that you have. There is nothing to fall back on because I actually quitted my job to do this. And on top of that, I decided to go with a shaped case and a shaped movement. I should explain that from an industrial perspective. So I'll go back to it later, but basically I thought, okay, I have the legal authorization from Breitling. I saved the money. I have the time because I have a part-time contract now. I'm good to go. And I started knocking on doors at suppliers with a big smile. Hey, it's me. I'd like to do this weird project. And I got slapped in the face really, really badly. Like, and that was one of the hard moments in this project because I thought, I mean, I did everything I could, and now even when I have the cash and the time, they would not let me do it, and I was not prepared that I had to convince people to say things, and that's simply because I had a high hierarchic position at Breitling, so I was more used to sort of give orders or give directions and have the job done. And now I was back at the bottom of the scale again, and I had to basically to beg people, although I was paying them to do it. So very special feeling, and I had to convince these guys to get these pieces. Yes, that's what I wanted to say. From an industrial perspective, when you make a new watch and a new movement, the movement represents 75% of the global investment. So out of my 1.1 million, 750 go to the movement alone. That includes development, tooling, prototyping, homologation, pre-series, all these things, and it requires uh, 4 people. You would have a technical constructor, a watchmaker, a project manager, and industrialization guy, so to speak. So these 4 people have been working for 2 years to develop that caliber. And that takes 750,000 Swiss francs to make a new movement. When you make that kind of investment, you want to protect it, which is why watch brands make round movements so that when you go on the market with your watch, if it doesn't sell, you can make a new case shape on that movement. You have protected your investment, or if the movement is not reliable, you can keep the case shape and put a new movement in it. But you want to decouple the risk between design and manufacturing. In my case, the movement and the case are completely married together. So that scares the suppliers because they are thinking, okay, if this guy doesn't sell anything, I'll end up having unpaid bills and he will have wasted my time when I have, restricted resources. And not only I wanted to do a shape movement, I wanted to do a shape movement in gold. So I really, they thought I was some sort of a madman, a very poetic designer uh, who thinks he can do a shaped gold movement. So it took me a lot of convincing, a lot of driving, a lot of phone calls, a lot of begging, a lot of money paid in advance, because the only way I could convince him at the end, I mean, some of them would simply not agree to do it. So yeah, that took a lot of convincing. Now we are. I started in 2021. We are mid 2024. So in July, I will finish a period of sort of sacrifice of working 7 days a week for 3 years. I promised Marie-Alix, my wife, that in July I will take my weekends back because I don't want to sacrifice my marriage for any professional endeavor. But that was necessary until now. And we, as you know, we've presented the Mirage to the public in October last year. And as we speak, 6 months later, we've currently allocated 6 years of production for this piece. And for Berneron, I have a long-term vision. So I have a 12-year product plan in place where we plan to release a new product every year. So in October this year, 1 year after the Mirage 38, we will announce the launch of a new product with a new bespoke caliber again that I've started the development of in September last year. So even before I released the Mirage 38, I had started the development of a second caliber.
It's
Um,
almost like taking the same risk that you took with the initial Mirage all over again. I mean, I know you had a book of orders at that point, but still, you didn't have a ton of cash flow. You still haven't delivered any product.
and this morning, and I started this week the development of a third caliber as well, and that comes for 2026. But if you want to make new calibers, and I'm sure people like Martin and Felix at Overk or Max at NBNF, they will tell you if you want to make new calibers, it's minimum 30 months down the line. If you want to do it properly and then make really a new caliber, I'm not talking about making a module or adding a couple of wheels in an existing movement. So you have to anticipate these things, and that's pretty much why this business is so demanding, because you have to take a leap of faith and you have to sort of pull on the trigger 2 years before you have to commit very early, and then you have to commit a lot of money. But
Do you want to give any hints or preview any further what's to come for the brand? You said September you'll have something, and then new movement and development 2026. I imagine that might be a little too far down the road, but anything you want to sort of elaborate on for now?
my goal by 2035 is to have four collections, the Mirage being one collection. So four collections, 16 references, and an annual production of around 400 pieces with a team of 15 people. That's pretty much the first chapter of what I want to achieve. And the second launch for this year in October 2024, I feel the need to establish the Mirage not as a one-shot shaped watch, but as a concept and as a collection, which means I'm going to hammer on that same nail again, coming with a Mirage 34 millimeter, all new bespoke movement again, full gold construction, of course. And we're going to go even one step further, venturing into stone dials. So this is where we're gonna push the Mirage even further into jewelry, sort of, and you'll see when you'll see the watch. But we I even find a way to drive the stone dial maker mad. Because I don't want to display it now because it's we got the technical approval recently, but it was not just about having a slice of stone. We went a bit further uh, into trying to push the technical boundaries. It has been a very challenging project because, again, when you are the smallest and the newest client at a supplier, you're not in the position to ask for fancy things.
Well, and I can't imagine there's a ton of stone dial suppliers around nowadays, right?
No, you have only three. You have two in Switzerland, one in Germany.
Oh, wow.
I've done an extensive research. For the record, I was quite shocked to discover is that some of the stones that us collector like are actually not natural stones. They are made by machines. And I take one example, uh, aventurine is not a natural stone. I discovered that when I did. This is something that is made. So the sparkling bits are added into some sort of a resin, or I don't know precisely what the mix is. It's pretty much glass. It's not resin. It's glass with sparkly bits in it. You won't find that in nature. This has been made by humans. The name Aventurine is a marketing name. For the record, same goes with cornaline and onyx. These are agate variants that have been tinted in the mass, but you won't find black onyx in nature. It doesn't exist. So I made all that research because I wanted to make sure um, that I would pick stones that are in line with the level of quality and what I expect from the product we want to make.
You mentioned getting your weekends back in July, and I understand that's because you're about to deliver sort of the first batch of Mirage orders. Is that basically correct?
Yes, yes. So as we speak, the first 24 pieces have been assembled. I just want to make an extensive testing about chronometry and having multiple cycles of charging and unwinding the barrels to make sure everything goes smooth. Um, so the final delivery, I will get the pieces probably early July. The problem is, as you know, July is pretty much a dead month in Switzerland in the watchmaking industry. We have the watchmaking holidays. This is the long-lasting tradition of the farming industry from centuries ago. So effectively, I probably plan to ship the first pieces early August, in August, basically from August to September. And I surely hope that by early September, the first 24 owners will have their Mirage in their closet.
You know, you talked about the business plan for Berneron, the brand, and the Mirage obviously has become the successful first release from the brand. But could you talk about the vision for the brand more broadly that you have to what you're communicating to make sure that it's not a one hit wonder, for lack of a better term? What your vision is as a broader brand?
So the feedback of the Mirage has been amazing, which actually puts an additional pressure on. It's like a group of musicians. What do you do for the second album? I surely not want to be locked creatively into asymmetric pieces only. So I can already say that my third launch in October 2025 will be a round case, and I want to go into complications. And I have this concept that I've been dreaming about for at least 6 years of a very technically demanding complete calendar that I want to work on. We've launched the development this week. It will take 24 months because I basically did my Christmas list again of what I want. I don't even know if it works yet, but we've agreed to spend the money. We've signed the legal contracts recently to start that project. So it will be a complete calendar in a round case. And the goal of Berneron, my goal as a brand, is to venture into fresh territories, sort of. I'm not interested into making another three-hand round watch or to making another chronograph or to making another tourbillon, not because I don't like these pieces, but simply because I think more established brands do it better than I will ever do so. And I've had negative feedback on the Mirage, of course. I was actually happy to hear negative feedback. Some people told me, "Look, I need symmetry. I can't deal with your band stuff," and I'm happy because, from an artistic perspective, it means I went far enough. It is very important to make sure that some people hate what you did because it gives you the guarantee that some others will love it. But on the other side, I've been extremely touched of the positive feedback we've received. I have the right to name a few esteemed collectors that decided to back us up, namely Laurent Picciotto from Chronopassion, Fred Mandelbaum, world chronograph expert. Same goes for Jeff Stein. We have Auro Montanari, Roni Madvani, Bader Belsala, Nadine Ghosn. These are, top world level collectors. I could not be more grateful to have them on board. Yeah, it turns out better than I would ever dream of.
Everything you're saying about the way you're building your company sounds so purposeful and deliberate and sort of a slow growth and not hypercharging it, despite the fact that you've gotten so much attention over the past 3 to 6 months or however long it's been. I wanted to ask you one question though, because you hinted at it when you named the Mirage, you named it that way because it felt as though it was all the things that you were told not to do during your time at large brands or as a designer designing watches for other brands. So I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit more as to what you as a designer view the state of watch design as like right now. What's going well and what you feel it's missing, or whether you have sort of any concerns or opportunities about where watch design is at on a broader level.
Um, on a broader level, I think I've said it in various podcasts in the past, over the past 2 years, that I think the time for designers will come again. And I think we are at the beginning of a decade where creativity will again be on the forefront of the development of the watch industry. We are exiting a decade of steel sports watches, clearly, I think every watch enthusiast now has one or two variations of a steel sports watch. So everybody has been fulfilled. We can now move on into hopefully dress watches, more precious metal, and this is where creativity comes into play. And if you'll see it clearly, if you see the tastemakers of tomorrow, namely uh, all the collectors like the Ronis and the Auros. I'm also thinking about the Mr. A and the young collectors, in Geneva and worldwide, like the Johnsons and all these guys. You can clearly tell that precious metal, smaller case diameter, more creative case shapes. Uh, will be the future, and I think it's good because a watch doesn't need to be round, it doesn't necessarily need to be waterproof, and especially if you get rid of precise timekeeping and bulletproof case construction and all that, you can, as a watch enthusiast yourself, display a much richer message. And then I think that the watch market will go into two directions. I think big brands will swallow the first 10 big brands will swallow probably 90% of the market. Um, but because watches are no longer tools and you can do so much more with them, and you have young companies that are willing to try, this is also why we see very impressive growth for the young independents. And it's a very, I think on a broader level, you can clearly see that the young independents, and namely the companies like Moser, MBNF, Uhrwerk, really paved the way for the second waves that I believe I'm part of, along with Xevdet, Redshep, Simon Brett. I'm probably forgetting a lot of. You could even also argue that Furlan Marie and Baltic are young independent watch
Yeah.
brands, although they operate at very different price points. But you can clearly see that all these brands have good traction, probably a lot more than they actually need to. And that proves that there is a need for that kind of product.
Yeah. But, you your answer focused on design, obviously, because that's what I asked you. But I think one of the reasons you caught on so quick is because the design of the Mirage is eye-catching, of course. But as we talked about at the top, it was driven by the mechanics inside. And when people looked closer at your watch, it was extremely technically interesting as well. So I think while the design and small watch discussion and all of that type of stuff is true, it there has to be something, there has to be substance there as well, technically speaking. Otherwise, people lose interest quickly. Do you agree with that?
Sure, yes. I think one of the mistakes not to do as a young independent, if your goal is just to do a variation of an existing product, just to be your own boss, do not bother to start, in my opinion. And then before I started Berneron, I asked myself the question in a very serious manner: why should people care? No? You have AP, Patek, Rolex, Lange, Breguet. I'm a collector myself. I admire these brands. Why should people care about buying, spending a hefty price on yet another brand that nobody has heard of? The only viable answer, in my opinion, is that you have to bring something on the table. You can't just replicate what others are doing. Uh, so if I was to make another three-hand round watch, yeah, I wouldn't have never started. And I think this is why, and also do not take shortcuts. But this is not something that young independents can be blamed of. Part of few exceptions, but usually, and if you see, for example, and my answer proves, I believe, to be right. If you look at Simon, for example, very traditional architecture, but he went completely nuts on the finishing. The level of finishing is like unreal. If you go Xevdet, same round watch, but he brought something into the movement, and you have that street culture linked into the product through the train station, railway, clock. If you take my stuff, you can see an artistic expression through the traditional fine art education that I received infused into the product. So you have to have a strong personality infused into the product, because that's the only way to make it, and this is why people should care. And I also think, as a consequence, young independents have a strong traction, because what used to be an horological treat in the past became mainstream. I take an example: AP 15202 Jumbo Royal Oak used to be a treat for uneducated collectors 10, 15 years ago, and now that became almost a mainstream status symbol. So when you are an educated collector, you actually get pushed by these big brands further into independence. And I hear this in the emails I receive every day and on the phone. Once you have your 5711, once you have your jumbo, once you went through these pieces, uh, educated collectors feel the need to have something even more special, and I think it's the natural evolution of a collection. So overall, I think all the lights, all the stars are aligned for young independents to have a great journey ahead. I think it is harder to create a company in the 21st century than it was 2 centuries ago, that I could argue. Um, but I think it's very well worthwhile. I mean, currently we are a team of 3 people. We are living the dream every day. It's very, very fun. I complain about the emails and the convincing the
Really?
suppliers. I should also mention the joy when I get to have the discussion I have with you now. When I spend an hour with a collector on the phone, I had dinner with a super cool collector yesterday, and these interactions are mega. Yesterday, I spent 2 hours having dinner with a collector I've never met. He's a business owner as well. He's 20 years older than I am, gave me tons of advice. I could not take the watch away from his hands. And we had great vibes. These are very, very cool moments. We have a lot of young fans as well. So I receive a lot of cheering messages on Instagram. Young guys who tell me, look, I'm 20, uh, I love what you're doing. I'll get there. In 20 years, I'll buy you a watch. And I'm like, sure, 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 dude. Like keep piling on, finish your degree, go there. I'll be happy to allocate you a watch in 20 years. Sure. And that kind of encouragement is very touching.
It's super cool. I mean, these things are nothing if not aspirational, right? And I'm sure it's got to be cool to hear from young guys like, this is what I'm aspiring to. This is what I'm working for, right? I think that's something cool to hear. But I'm curious. You mentioned you had to sell off much of your personal collection to fund this crazy project of yours. I'm curious if you could give us a quick look into maybe one watch you kept, or maybe it's the watch you're wearing right now, just to give us a taste for what you personally spend whenever you have a spare dime that you can throw towards superfluous watches.
So the ones I kept, I kept a 5196 from Patek, which Marie
Sure.
Alix actually bought me when we got engaged. So this I would never sell
Yeah, of course.
unless I have to sleep under a bridge with her. This is when we're gonna sell that watch.
Yep.
We also have a Reverso that we actually bought together when we were 25. Standard steel model, nothing fancy, but it's
Yeah.
just it was cool. We spent money together on a
Yep.
watch.
Yep.
What else do I have? I'm planning to get the Rolex back from my father at some point. I
His sub.
love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
What else do I have? I do actually have a Breitling 57 with the concave bezel. Very retro inspired.
The Super Ocean. Yeah.
Yeah, precisely.
Very cool.
And and I sold the most expensive stuff I have because I
Yeah,
needed
of
the
course.
cash.
Of course.
You will make me cry about it, so I won't go on forever. But I had
Yep. Sure.
manual 1815, the one with the manual power reserve on the dial. Love that watch. I had a set of 3940s, three metal. Stupid enough to sell that, but I mean, when you want to I needed serious cash. I mean, as I told you, no choice, but spent almost 3 years to get them.
Wow.
One was not as good as I wanted it to be, but nonetheless, I had a set. I love that watch. Sold it. He went out like hotcakes. I'm still regretting it to this day, but uh, making strong choices, I think, is important. Uh,
Well, listen, I'll speak for so many others when I say that selling those watches to, I think that the money went to good use. I think it's funded an amazing project that's got a lot of the watch world excited when that doesn't always happen. So I'll just say that I think it all went to good use. But listen, Sylvain, I want to thank you so much for your time. We've gone much longer than the typical episode goes. So I appreciate you sort of staying on and just talking about all of your career up to this point and developing Berneron and the Mirage. I'll speak for everyone when I say I'm excited to see what comes next from you, further releases, how you build the brand going forward. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your time, and we'll hope to do something again with you sometime soon.
Thank you very much, Tony, for having me. To the entire Hodinkee community, I've been part of the website for better part of 10 years at least. I've followed the entire journey. Very happy to have you on board because I think you're truly embodies the new wave of collecting, like younger, sharp guys. You're really an icon of the next generation of collecting, I think.
Well, you're making me blush. We might even cut this out of the interview because it's far too kind, Sylvain. But if not, thank you so much for your kind words. Thank you again for the time. Thanks as always to Vic Automanelli for their editing. And thank you all for listening. We'll see you again next week.